You are listening to Digging In Podcast, presented by Rooted Wealth Advisors.
For those of you watching, welcome back to another episode of the Digging In Podcast. Today, you can see we have an extremely special guest that I've been looking forward to for quite some time. He's the Chief Investment Officer for AE Wealth Management, Tom Siomades. Tom, how are we doing this morning?
Doing great, John. Thanks for letting me hop on with you. I know it's an interesting time out there for folks to put it mildly. Maybe we should change the name of the podcast from Digging In to Digging Out, because it kind of feels like we've been buried with a lot of stuff. But yeah, it's just another day at the office, feels like here.
Just another day. Yeah, I mean, with everything going on, I especially appreciate you taking the time just to chat with me and once again, hopefully bring some value to our viewers from a very professional perspective. It looks pretty nice behind you from what I can see. How's the weather down there?
Well, I'm out here just outside of Kansas City. It's been chilly.
Okay.
It's spring is here. It's like
It's gonna go back
it's
and
that
forth.
turbulent. Yeah, it's just like the markets, right? I mean, it's just kind of like could be misleading, and all of a sudden it's great, then it's not so great. We've had some crazy weather here. We're actually getting into tornado season pretty soon here,
Okay.
where I don't know, I guess every part of the country has got its curses. You got hurricanes down south and earthquakes and forest fires, and I guess we get tornadoes. So yeah, but it's nice.
Yeah, cool, man. So you don't know this, or I don't think you know this, but we actually contributed to an article together. So of course, I've been familiar with your name for a long time now through our relationship with AE Wealth Management. And so as I'm sure I worked with a gal who, she has relationships with journalists and editors, and she would always come to me and say, hey, I have someone that's writing an article and she has these questions. If you have time, will you answer them? And we'll see if we can help you become a contributor. So
Sure.
I believe the article is like 4 steps to achieving a comfortable retirement. And I'm a person that as soon as she would send those my way, I'm doing it right away because I think it's just a really great way to be a resource for people out there, the public. But B, it's just selfishly, it's good credibility. Anyway, so put these answers together. The next day she says, hey, it was featured in Yahoo Finance, which for me several years ago was a huge deal. I mean, I was pumped. I was super pumped. So I went and read the article, and yeah, you're actually a contributor on the same article, and I have it framed up at the front of the office. And I bet you didn't know that, did you?
No,
Yeah.
and then it even gets crazier because once it gets featured in these like online things, it gets picked up, and then all of a sudden the AP picks it up, and it's crazy because then you're like, your name goes from being like nowhere to like you've been mentioned like 5 million times. So yeah, it's scary the amplification, right? That the internet can provide, good and bad, but
Yeah, definitely
yeah,
good and
it's
bad.
interesting though. That's great though.
Yeah, I thought it was a cool little connection piece. And frankly, I think I mean, you have what, over 35 years of experience in the industry, is that correct?
Yeah, I've been at this since about 1989 now. So
Wow.
yeah, and I've done pretty much what anything that you could ask for in investments. I mean, I've done research, I've done trading, I've done portfolio management, I've done client outreach, I've done asset allocation work. So it's great because I get to do a lot of all of that at AE, right? Which you wouldn't think that, right? You think you'd be someplace like Chicago, New York, whatever. But those places tend to want to like kind of focus you.
Hmm.
Everyone's so specialized, right? Like, so I go to some place like a big shop and they'll be like, oh, well, we want you to run portfolio, or we want you to run our research group, or we want you to run our trading desk. And it's like, I like all those things, but I like the variety of being able to do all those things. Because, I'm of the, I don't know, I don't know if this applies to you or, everyone learns differently, right? I'm
Yeah.
of the opinion of like, I got to do stuff, right? I got to be involved in stuff. And, that's the only way I learn and stay current, right? So for me, like being able to work on models, talk to money managers, have my hand in everything makes me a better resource to work with folks like yourself and clients, because I'm not just talking from like, the 15th floor balcony, right? Yelling down at, hey, you people down there, like some sort of like ivory tower person, right? I mean, it's like I'm in the nitty gritty on a daily basis, which is great. And I don't know that you can do that anymore. I mean, it seems to be a very specialized career path. But yeah, I've worked at big shops. I've run my own advisor, I've done it soup to nuts, everything. So I think I don't know that I won't say I'm the smartest person in the world, but at least I've got as much experience as anybody in the world doing this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, clearly you have the resume, supporting that and just are a wealth of knowledge. Let's go back, even further, before you got started in the finance, industry. So you are a graduate of West Point Military Academy, is that correct?
Yeah, so I went to the academy, graduated. I thought I was going to be a general. Spent my entire career, it is when you're like 20 years old, right?
Yeah.
And so, I graduated. I got commissioned as an infantry officer. I went on, did all the basic, infantry officer stuff. I went down to Benning. I went to Ranger School, officer basic, all that stuff. I got assigned to my first unit, which was pretty awesome. I was out in Fort Carson, Colorado. And, then somewhere in between there, like life intervenes, right? So I got married, and all of a sudden the appeal of painting your face green, living out in the woods and sleeping in the dirt, didn't have as much appeal when you knew you had a wife at home that would, cook for you, and you had a nice, comfortable bed to sleep in, right? So, my life took a turn at that point, so I did my commitment, and I got out. And that from that standpoint, like I'm originally from New York, so I got the old speech, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere from dad. And so I went back to New York, and like a dope, I walked around, looked for a job. And it's interesting today, we've got like LinkedIn, we've got all this stuff, right? Like when I got out of the army, like I literally had like a book, like a glue bound book, right? That was like the West Point Society of New York. And I literally like flipped through page by page, calling people and saying, hey, my name is Tom. I'm trying to find other grads, right? Because there was a lot of grads in business, for everything from pharmaceuticals to financials to everything, right? So I'm calling these guys up, and I'm like, hey, because nobody would understand, right? If you go to a person who's a civilian and you tell them I was an infantry officer, they're like, well, we don't do that at the company. Like, what are you going to do? It's like, but if you go to a grad, they'll be like, okay, I understand where your background is, right? We understand what you went through, and then I know what you did in the army, right? And so what were the things that I brought to the table? First off, it's an ability to just assess situations and lead people, right? Two is, if things don't work out, you got to figure out a way to overcome them, right? So there's a planning component, and there's a grit component too, right? So those kind of things are sort of what today we would describe as soft skills, but to me, they're like life skills. Like I don't do anything in life. I'm like thinking that I'm not going to encounter a problem. Tech is going to fail. I need to find a backup. Markets are going to behave differently than what I expect, and I need to figure out a way to react to that. Everything in my life has sort of worked in the sense of like, you need to plan for it. You need to have a plan for it. And then, obviously when you get the old Mike Tyson, when you get punched in the face, your plan changes. You have to have the internal sort of mindset to say, okay, I can't hold on to this anchor that's dragging me right down. That my old plan is dragging me down to the bottom of the ocean. I got to figure out a different way to do it. So those are the kind of things that are tough for a young officer getting out of the army to convince the civilian world, because people don't, they don't understand those experiences. So that's why I went after the old grads, and I found a guy who I don't know, this might be too much of a blast from the past. This might be like ancient history for you, but I got a job at a place called Manufacturers Hanover Trust, which was
Okay.
since acquired by Chemical Bank, and then Chemical Bank was acquired by JP Morgan. So
Okay.
it's the predecessor. Actually, the headquarters building of Manufacturers Hanover Trust is still the headquarters of JP Morgan down on Park Avenue. So, I started out working in the trust department, right? I started out in the trust
Wow.
department calculating performance on pension plans and things like that. And what my path is kind of unique into the asset management world, because I didn't start out as one of these silver spoon, Harvard Business School graduates that walks in and they get scooped up by Goldman Sachs and get trained to become an analyst and then a portfolio man. I started out on the gritty side of things, right? On the operations side, right? Doing calculations on flipping coupons off of bonds, calculating performance, security settlements, all the stuff that is not romantic, right? It's not glamorous. It's not like Charlie Sheen Wall Street stuff, right? And you always get yelled at. That's the other thing. And that's another thing that West Point taught me. It's like, don't take it personally because people are always yelling at you. Being in operations, nobody wants to hear you or know you. And the only time you get any kind of recognition is when something goes wrong, right? So 10 million things can go right. They don't say anything about operations, but the minute a trade blows up, even if you were within, a block radius of the thing, it's your fault somehow, right? So I kind of figured that out. I'm not the dumbest guy in the world, but nor am I the smartest. But I'm kind of figured out it's not good getting yelled at, right? So I maneuvered my way into to the middle office, where I was a liaison between the back office and portfolio managers, and then eventually I got my foot in the door with trading and portfolio management and research. So it's not your traditional path, but it also speaks to the way things are, it says who you are as a person. Like, you could have easily said, well, I want to do these things, but they won't let me. And I could view that as being a victim somehow. And that's not fair, and pout my lip. But I was like, hey, you know what? Let me just get in the door, just get on the field, let's play the game. And at the end of the day, you do your best and you see where you end up. So an interesting point, just as an FYI, my son's actually finishing up his junior year at West Point. He's
No
not
kidding.
enjoying it anywhere near as much as I am now, 30 plus years removed. But I'm sure he has a different perspective than I do right now, because I think it's awesome, but I'm not dealing with it on a daily basis.
Yeah,
So
that is awesome. Something I'm sure you're super proud of him too, especially finishing up his junior year. But no, I think that's cool. I think, one of my questions was really going to be how did that military experience translate, into the professional world? And I think you just hit it dead on with those three things. Especially just from that grit perspective. I think that's something that's lost in a lot of people. Rolling the sleeves up, just play the game, get on the field. Life happens. It's not always going to go our way, and it's overcoming that, I think, is really important, especially in this industry, in a lot of different ways.
I think at the end of the day, it's as simplistic and as silly as it might sound, no matter how bad things get in your day to day, it's never as bad as 2 o'clock in the morning standing waist deep in swamp water in North Florida, getting
Hmm.
yelled at. So how much worse? I mean, maybe Korean prison is worse. I don't know about
Potentially.
Korean prison, maybe, but it's like when you have life experiences that you can rely on and say, you know what, I remember how stuff used to be and how
Yeah.
bad you get. The market doing what it's doing, you know, no, it's you can work yourself up. Trust me, you can work yourself up emotionally and stuff, but it's knowing, having that perspective of saying, look, you know what? I get it. I know things are bad. And you can't discount people. You can't just call someone a wuss because they feel badly about how things are going. You have to
Right.
be empathetic. But at the same time, you can give them perspective and say, listen, you know what? Try to think about a darker time in your life. And
So,
is it really that bad?
yeah.
Because we can convince ourselves. I mean, the mind is super powerful, right? I mean, you're sitting there and you can convince yourself almost about anything, right? And if we're given that opportunity and we don't have calm voices or people to bounce ideas off of, we can paint ourselves into some pretty dark corners.
Amen. That's good messaging. I think that's a good transition into where we're at today from a stock market perspective, because there might be, some of our viewers that are feeling in that dark place. And I think even before we get to the maybe the emotional component of investing and just cyclical cycles of the market, I'd really love to hear your perspective to say if I was just kind of your friend or a family member, and I'm a bit confused as to what's even causing all of this turbulence over the last, few days, Tom. How would you explain that to someone that is ignorant to just maybe the stock market and how it works?
So I would back up from the stock market and I would frankly talk about like what's attempted to happen here, right?
Okay.
We're trying to reset our trade relations with the world, which seems like an awesome task. I don't know that it's ever been done before, but at the end of the day, the message is that look, we've been treated unfairly. Believe it, whether you believe that or not, we've been
Hmm.
treated unfairly by the rest of the world. They take advantage of us. We consume a lot of products around the world from around the world. They send us their stuff. They take very little of our stuff. Okay. As a result, we're trying to change that dynamic. Wall Street, the stock market, doesn't like change. Okay. Doesn't like uncertainty. They don't really care what the game is. They don't care how long the grass on the field is. They don't care how long the field is. They don't care whether you're bringing a lacrosse stick or whether you're bringing a football. They just want to know what the game is and that the field doesn't move, right? So what we don't want, the market doesn't want is like, that you guys, I don't know how many folks probably with their kids have watched all those Harry Potter movies. But
Yeah.
all of that, like that Quidditch thing where things are moving up and down and they're zooming around on brooms and they're throwing a little ball and a big ball and there's hoop. Market doesn't like that. That's confusing as all get out. And that's what you're having here, right? I mean, Trump basically dropped a PR market nuke, for like
Hmm.
a better description, on the rest of the world. Said, listen, we're not going to tolerate this. We want you to come to the table and trade, more fairly with us. Whether you agree with that or not, was that the right approach? I don't know, but that's what the market's reacting to. But when you think about it, and we go back to the thing we talked about earlier about having perspective, we really don't export a whole hell of a lot to the rest of the world because we've spent the last 40, 50 years moving all of that stuff to other places. We've done that, and now we have a tremendous amount of leverage because everybody wants to sell to us. They're not buying anything from us. So he's trying to reset that dynamic, but we're also in a much stronger position than the rest of the world because we're not as dependent on our, exports. So when they say, oh, we're going to just tariff your stuff, we're not selling any cars to Europe. We're not exporting a whole lot of stuff to China, but they're counting on our market. So we're in a hugely popular position. And paradoxically, what's interesting about that is, if we accomplish what Trump's trying to do is bring manufacturing back here, we'll be susceptible to the thing that the rest of the world is now, right? Because we're going to be trying to export stuff and they're going to be like, we don't want to buy your stuff. So, I think it's a never ending game. I wish they would just get rid of these tariffs and just everybody just compete. I mean, I understand a small country that wants to protect a business or an industry within itself. But I don't consider China a small country. I don't consider the EU a small country. I mean, some of these other little dinky countries, maybe you can say, listen, you guys can protect your, I don't know, sugar cane industry or whatever it is. But that's really what's driving markets right now is more than anything is like they don't know how things are going to play out. And there's a constant dribble of maybe not. Well, you saw yesterday.
Yeah.
Crazy. Like it was a bad headline that said, oh, we're going to do a 90-day pause. And the market whips around minus 1,000 to up 1,000. It's crazy.
That was wild. So the way that I'm gathering it and just trying to like grasp it a little bit from what you said. So from in the US, from an exportation perspective, the idea is our export, we don't rely on it economically as much as other companies. Is that correct?
Yeah, other countries depend on exporting to the US more
Okay.
so we export to other countries right now. So, and they've built a process where it behooves them to send to us and not take from us.
hmm And then, so then the other component to that is from a productivity perspective, we manufacturing wise are not as productive as other countries or what we have been in the past. And the idea is to bring that back here. Is that
Right.
somewhat okay?
And there's some part of it, there's a national security component. And I think a lot of people saw what happened during the pandemic and we had to get our PPE from China and they wouldn't, they turned the boat around and took it, they didn't bring it here, that kind of stuff. A lot of the pharmaceuticals are manufactured overseas.
Okay.
Those are things that can have impact, right? Silicon chips, for example, all of that type of stuff. They can have an impact on our security. So I think some of that stuff makes sense. Making t-shirts here that you can buy for $9.99 on Amazon, I really don't care who makes it, right?
Yeah.
But the problem that we've had here, and again, this is kind of one of those things where we don't want to get off in a too philosophical place, but
Yeah.
labor costs are higher here because we have, more regulations and we have unions and we have all kinds of stuff. And a lot of people have just offshored stuff to places where, it is kind of sad. Like we turn a blind eye, everyone talks about like, oh, they want clean electric vehicles. Okay. But when you find out that a lot of the stuff that's used in electric vehicles is mined by basically child and slave labor in some place in Africa, nobody wants to hear about that. But if we were to do that, then all of a sudden that Tesla, instead of costing $60,000, if we were to do that with union people here in this country, it would be $200,000, and nobody wants to pay that. So
Right.
we kind of con ourselves with this type of stuff. But at the end of the day, there's some things that it's okay for other people to make, and there's other things that we need to. So we need to make sure that we make the things that matter to us in this country in case we ever have a problem, like the supply chains and the COVID stuff. If folks remember that from a few years back.
Yeah, I mean that's incredible economic insight. So then, speaking to that same friend or family member, if I just kind of follow that up with like, well, Tom, I'm scared, right? I'm worried, back to a stock market perspective, seeing the losses of my investments. I mean, how would you approach that just on a more personal level to calm those worries, to ease those concerns?
So my advice to people that aren't in the business is you need a financial advisor, first of all. I mean, when you have a problem health-wise, you go to a doctor, right? You don't try to take care of it yourself. Your car breaks down, you go to a mechanic, right? Because they've made it such that you can't, it's like you can't self-medicate, right? And you can't fix a car by yourself because it's too complicated. I look at it as having a financial advisor to me is like having a financial healthcare professional, right? So that'd be my first question to a person is, do you have an advisor? And if you don't, you need to get them. My second question is to the person, if they do have a financial advisor, is like, how comfortable are you with your plan? Okay, because once again, we get back to that we talked about earlier, that planning component, right?
Right.
You know, if they are comfortable with their plan, then you have to ask them, well, what is it about what's going on today, the last 4 days, week, that makes you question your plan, right? And you work through that, right? And you find out, well, you know what, this process of globalizing the economy has been going on for 50, 60 years. We've had 4 days of turbulence. Do you really think the stock market is going to be lower 3 years from now? Really? Do you? Because I don't believe that. I mean, nobody would invest in the stock market if it was a loser proposition. It
Right.
goes up 75% of the time, the market is up. It's a fact. If you go back 100 years from now, every 3 out of 4 years it's up. You're going to fire your coach that wins 3/4 of your games? You know, how many baseball players have hit 750 in their life? Right? So
Right.
you know, you need to remind people of that. And then the other part of it is like, what is, if they're 68 years old and they're 100% of the stock market, that's a problem.
Right. That's an issue.
But if they're 20 years old and they're 90% of the stock market, who cares? You don't need the money today. You may need it 40 years from now. So you're investing for the future, right? So you need to give them that perspective. And then the other part of it is, and you need to get to the nitty-gritty of it, how much of your allocation is in stock? Because we see this stuff every day. I mean, I'm surprised my eyes are like still like I can actually see, because they have it like cauterized over, like, and they're completely like white. Watching the crap on TV, it's literally like a minute by minute, like it's up, it's down, it's up, it's down, right? And you get a myriad of opinions, and it's going to drive you crazy. But the question is, you feel like that's you out there. You feel like you're the guy, you know, on the front of the, hanging off the back of the Titanic right before you fall off. And are you, though? Do you have an annuity? Because that didn't change, right? If part of your allocation is an annuity or in fixed income or whatever, or however your allocation is, if those things are there, they're meant to kind of stabilize that. So how much of your allocation is exposed to that? And then, you know, the final component of it is, just because you have a financial professional and because you have a plan, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier, there's a financial or an emotional component to the financial piece. It's like, if you're not wired, if like the last 4 days have shaken your resolve, you need to find a better, different plan, a different allocation. But understand, don't cry when the stock market goes up 20% and your portfolio only goes up 3%. You didn't have any of that stress. So, you know, volatility is the price we pay for outsized performance and outsized gains, but you also potentially are going to have outside losses. And I guess the final thing I would say is, you know, it's not a loss until you book it, right? So you can have the market go up and down, and a month from now, the thing could be right back where it was. And if you didn't do anything, nothing happened. So I think, again, when we talked about going in that dark place, right? And think about it, and think about what's happened. You've had the financial crisis. Everyone said it was going to take decades to come back from that. Came back in 2-3 years. COVID, it's going to take years to come back. It was back by August. It was down in the dumps April, May, and it was back by August. You know, all of these crises that we've had, you know, 2022, it came back. There's 9/11, you know, you name it, .com bubble, they've all come back, right? So the question is, what is it about this time that's different? The markets don't come back. I don't know. I don't think there's anything different. I think there's going to be a trade spat. I think they're going to argue, and I think, you know, smart people are going to come up to reset the landscape. I don't think it's going to be nuclear Armageddon. I think at the end of the day, you know, markets will realize that, you know what, this is a thing, and we need to get back to making money, and they'll stop with the volatility, and we'll resume our upward course. And finally, you know, at the end of the day, there's probably, in my opinion, more good news to come out. One of the things that's interesting, John, that I found fascinating is, like, all the bad news came out. Almost all of it came out in one, like, crazy presser, right?
Right.
There's Trump standing there with his menu board, his sandwich board.
When he pulled that out, I thought, oh boy.
I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, that's what you guys do. You guys went to college, you guys got PhDs, you got all this stuff. And what you did was you basically created like a 6th grade, you know, construction paper project with like little numbers for people.
I couldn't believe it.
Whatever.
Anyway,
But my point is, all of that stuff, you saw the menu. This is the chef special. This is what's going on. Now, what's going to happen is, and Trump being Trump, what's going to happen is, you know, yesterday it was 50 countries died talking. Now it's 70. Tomorrow it'll be 110. You know, so, and then every time one of these dominoes falls, it's like another name gets crossed off the board, right? And every time they reach a deal with a new country, it's going to be a new positive news event, right? The EU's on board, Japan's on board, South Korea's on board. It's going to go on and on. Then they've got the tax thing that they're going to work on, right? The budget. That, when they pass that, that'll be a positive event. And hopefully, you know, some of this cost saving stuff from Doge, actually results in a lower deficit. And, maybe the Fed decides to lower rates instead of, now they're saying it's possibly might lower rates by 5 times this year instead of 2. So there's a lot more positivity out there that's kind of getting masked with all this crazy, tariff fear that we have right now. So
Yeah, I think the way, if I just summed it up in 2 words, it's zoom out. Don't zoom in right now, zoom out, and you can continue to zoom out, and it'll bring a much different perspective than maybe what we see today. But no, that's good. That's really good insight, just for those that might be feeling, that emotional component. So I know we're coming up on things. So then here you have my permission to get as far into the weeds as you want, depending on the time. You had mentioned kind of your experience in modeling, right? And then I heard you kind of use the word asset allocation. And that's something, you didn't really hear a lot about the last couple of years, as just really large cap domestic equity has dominated the market, in my opinion. So talk a little bit about asset allocation and potentially your approach to specifically asset allocation modeling. I would love to hear more just personally on that.
So asset allocation for folks that are not familiar with it is basically you take various security types, large cap, you mentioned international bonds, you combine them in a way that they achieve a stated risk reward profile for you, right? So the way I look at asset allocation modeling is I basically apply the same philosophy, but I either juice it up or water it down based on how conservative or aggressive you are. Okay. And then you basically, what makes that work for me is you basically tell the same story, except you focus on different parts of the story. So you don't have to learn a whole new language when you talk about asset allocation. You just can basically move up and down the dial of aggressive to conservative, right? And what I do is I typically look at, how asset classes have performed in the past and combine them to give you a smoother ride than you would have if you just invested in one or willy-nilly, jumped around. Asset allocation goes hand in hand should go hand in hand with diversification. And a lot of people don't understand diversification either. But the simplest way I can describe diversification to people is you're not truly diversified if you love everything in your portfolio. You should genuinely have something in your portfolio you hate all the time. Kind of like kids, right? I mean, I got 2 kids.
I love that
Right?
analogy.
I hate to say it, but my daughter is like on my good side 90% of the time. My son, not so much, right? But that's kind of the way you got to look at the assets in there, right? There, in order for you to mitigate some of the, ups and downs of a portfolio, is there has to be something that goes up when some of it goes down, and vice versa. So long as they're all still trending up and to the right and mostly positive, right? And I think that's the philosophy I apply to it, without getting specifically why I put 3% there or 4.8% there. But to me, it's like you're never going to get the highest high, but you're also not going to drop to the lowest low either. So you just want to make sure that there's enough correlation between the assets that they're going up most of the time. But when times are bad, you actually have something that, pulls you up when the rest of it is kind of sagging. So that, I don't know, like, again, we could talk asset allocation for, hours.
Yeah.
I don't know that I think people would tune out after 2 minutes, but you and I could talk for hours.
I was gonna say we could enjoy that, but I think that was exactly what I was looking for, is just your perspective, your experience on asset allocation and why it's important. I think my last question to that is, has it, outside of maybe changing a few things, has it stayed the same for the last 35 years, or have you seen asset allocation evolve over that period of time?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes, from the standpoint of there's a lot more product, right? A lot more areas of that's come online. For example, 35 years ago, I didn't have ETFs, right? And then just the and flavors of ETFs is amazing, right? And so you can get as general as you want with asset allocation. And what I'm talking about simply is like you can have just an S&P 1500, which is large cap, mid cap, small cap with one ETF. You can have an aggregate bond ETF and maybe a little bit of, you can literally play the market or allocate to the market with just three things, right? Stocks, bonds, and cash. Or you can have an allocation that has 30 different specific market ETFs. So I think the specificity has gotten has increased. Also, the other thing that's different than it was years ago was you have a lot of computer and algorithmic driven trading that really like you can't, as an individual investor, you can't get in front of that. And so when you talked about not zooming in but zooming out, you almost have to, you'll never catch these kind of laser beams that are coming out. Like, who would have known, like, on April 2nd, unless you got a gut feeling that said,
Right.
you know what, I think the market's going to blow up, I'm getting out. Okay, most people didn't. But did you see how fast it dropped? And there was absolutely no way. And by the same token, if you had gotten out on Friday, I had enough, I can't take it anymore. And then yesterday looked equally bad, but for a second, it looked like you really messed up. And then it got bad again. And then this morning, you can't. So that's the other thing that's happened is like the markets used to be slower. Settlements used to take 5 days. Now they're like next day. I mean, there's a lot that it's evolved, but at the same time, I think the fundamentals haven't changed, right? Remember, you're not betting, you're not gambling, you're investing, right? So think of it as a long-term project. Think about it as an opportunity to as you move through your financial journey, that train's going to keep moving, right? So everyone says, well, I'm not 100 years old. I can't look at the Harvard endowment and that's what happens. And I have to retire by a certain, yeah. But even though that train is moving, you get to choose when you pull the stop cable, right? For the conductor to let you off. And so that conductor is your advisor. And the other thing that I would leave for people that I think is super important, just doing the things, i.e., saving for retirement, picking an advisor. You're not done. Okay. Don't ever think you're done at that point. Okay. You owe it to the advisor and to yourself and to your loved ones to have an active, continuous dialogue about what your goals are. I don't think you need to learn. I don't know if you go to Starbucks, John, but I don't like learning Starbucks language. Just give me a damn medium coffee, leave me alone. I don't want to learn fancy names or stupid stuff, whatever they sound. Nor should you when you're retired, right? You should
Tell that to my girlfriend.
Well, you tell her like
I don't want to remember that either.
If she wants to learn a whole new retail language, no thanks. Just give me a medium coffee, leave me alone, right? But a lot of people think that when I say you need to stay engaged in retirement, it means you have to learn about ETFs and exchange traded notes and this, that. No. You don't need to know that stuff. They need to come see you and they say, John, these are my goals. This is what I'm trying to achieve. Okay. And then you sit down and you craft a plan with them. And then they say, when things go bad like this, the first question you should ever ask is, hey, am I on track to meet my goals? And if the answer is yes, leave it alone. Right. And if it's no, we need to rethink things. But I think, it doesn't have to be a 50-50 highway when it comes to communication with your advisor, but you need to make that effort so people understand what your goals are and that your risk assessment and your asset allocation and your modeling and all that other stuff, your plan is oriented to meet those goals. And that's all you need to do. The other thing I would just tell people, just don't watch the nonsense on TV. It's like, listen, there's 15 minutes, 20 minutes, if you count weather. There's 15 minutes of maybe news per day. We have 24-hour news channels and literally people that worked hard all their lives, stressed out, worked a job, worrying about getting laid off. They save some money. They're living in the most wonderful time in human history, the most advanced country. They have assets and they have free time. Don't spend it watching CNN or Fox News, one of these clowns. They're on for 24 hours a day. They tell you the same story over and over again. They whip you up into a frenzy about stuff you shouldn't care about and stuff you can't do anything about either, right? And what that does is the number one killer for folks is stress. And you don't need that. If you have a solid plan, you're comfortable with where you are, tune out. Get a hobby, go hang out with the grandkids, read, do something. But at the end of the day, you see it more often than not. I run into people all the time. They're sitting there and they just like literally turn on the TV and they just watch it all day long. And they just, it gets in their psyche. And that's what we talked about earlier. When we talked about earlier, about you defeating yourself mentally.
Right.
You can paint yourself in a really dark place if you sit and watch, news all day long, or what they call news.
Yeah. Great perspective. My opinion, simple and sound advice. Turn the TV off, just get him his damn coffee. That's what I'm taking it as. But Tom, man, I know your time's super valuable, and I've probably taken more than you anticipated, but can't thank you enough for joining me today and just sharing some of your knowledge.
Yeah, and you know what? Hopefully, I can get up your way, and we can maybe do this in person. But I'm happy to hop on. If things need talking about, I'm happy to get on. And if you want to share a different perspective, or at least give you my perspective. Like I said, I don't pretend I know everything, but I've seen a lot of this stuff, and it always manages to get better. And you told people 3 years ago, hey, you know what? The S&P, would you be happy with the S&P at 5,000? And they would have been ecstatic. Where do I sign? But guess what happened? We got up to 6,100 on the S&P, and all of a sudden 5,000 doesn't look so good. But it looked good 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So go figure. Listen, it's people are going to be people, but if you can have a good perspective and a good attitude, I think you can pretty much overcome anything. But you have to want to do that too. I think a lot of people are unwilling. So, like I said, I'm always happy to come back on if you need me to, or if you want me to. And hopefully I get up in your neck of the woods and see you guys, and we can do this live.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I hope I get to take you up on that offer soon. So for any clients that are watching, hopefully that we're always here as a resource. If there's anything that prompts some questions, you just need your advisor to talk to, give us a call. If you're, not a client and just want a second opinion, want to chat through maybe your asset allocation, give our office a call, 866-766-8332. We would be happy to have a conversation with you. Tom, thanks again.
You.
This was Digging In Podcast, presented by Rooted Wealth Advisors.